He probably stole that seat. There's no way he belongs here." A flight attendant muttered those words moments before slapping a quiet black man across the face, in front of influencers, executives, and a shocked cabin. She didn't ask his name, didn't check the manifest, didn't know the man she assaulted wasn't just a passenger. He owned the entire jet. By the time the plane landed, her career was over, her face was all over the internet, and her assumptions had cost her everything. This isn't just a story about ignorance. It's about identity, power, and karma hitting back at 30,000 feet. Subscribe now, because what happened next will leave you speechless. The early morning light draped New York City's John F. Kennedy International Airport in a gentle haze. Sunbeams caught the reflective surfaces of planes parked along the tarmac, each a gleaming promise of departure and discovery. Among these aircraft stood a sleek private jet, part of a charter service that catered to the world's elite. Ground staff bustled around it, loading luggage, checking manifest lists, and confirming final details before departure. Little did anyone know that in the next few hours, a cataclysmic event would unravel on this very plane, setting off a chain reaction none of them could have predicted. Inside the main cabin, flight attendant Sharon Whitfield was meticulously checking every detail. She prided herself on perfection. Crisp uniform, check. Polished heels, check. Cabin spotless, check. She believed wholeheartedly in the old adage, perception is reality, and Sharon always took pains to present an immaculate image. Yet behind those bright blue eyes and impeccable makeup lurked a growing frustration. Life hadn't been kind lately, from financial woes to arguments with her fiancé. Stress weighed heavily on Sharon's shoulders, and she felt her patience wearing thin. And so, as she arranged the plush pillows and made sure every seat displayed a menu and complimentary Evian water, Sharon vowed to hold everything together for just one more flight. "I'll get through this," she whispered under her breath, trying to push away her gnawing anxiety. No one, least of all Sharon herself, had any clue how dramatically the day's events would test her resolve and her very sense of decency. Christopher Barnes walked through the private terminal's sliding doors with quiet confidence. At 35 years old, he was a tall, athletic black man with a relaxed but purposeful stride. Most people who saw him assumed he was perhaps a professional athlete or a business consultant, but rarely did anyone guess the truth. Christopher was an extraordinarily successful entrepreneur and philanthropist. His net worth soared well past the billion-dollar mark, but he seldom advertised that fact. Christopher's casual attire defied expectations for someone of his stature. He wore black jeans, a well-worn leather jacket, and simple sneakers. He liked to travel light, no flashy logos, no entourage. His only carry-on was a backpack containing a laptop, a thick manuscript for a charitable board meeting, and personal essentials. Though he owned this particular jet through a shell company, Christopher preferred to blend in. Observing how people treated others when they thought no one was important always revealed their true character. He approached the waiting area where a polite agent bowed slightly, double-checking his name on the passenger list. With a smile, Christopher thanked the agent and proceeded onto the tarmac. He had a busy itinerary, a meeting in Tokyo to finalize a major donation to Feeding America, a real-life non-profit that was making massive strides in reducing hunger across the United States. And after Tokyo, another hop to Singapore for a global tech summit, where Christopher would discuss expanding sustainable energy initiatives. But first, there was this flight. As Christopher took his first step onto the jet's staircase, he was wholly unaware that a single interaction with the flight attendant inside would reshape his day, and that of everyone on board. Sharon stood near the entry hatch, wearing her most professional smile. She was in her mid-30s with hair neatly swept into a bun. The second Christopher appeared in the doorway, her initial reaction was one of polite courtesy. She had welcomed countless passengers over the years after all, but something about him, his unremarkable luggage, his comfortable clothes, caused her to misjudge him. "Welcome aboard," Sharon said, her eyes flicking from Christopher's face to his simple backpack. "And Do you know if you're on the right plane? She tried to mask the skepticism in her tone, but her eyebrows gave her away. Christopher noticed the slight hesitation. He offered a cordial nod. Yes, I'm pretty sure. The flight heading to Tokyo with a stop in Seattle for refueling, correct? Sharon's face tightened. She consulted her clipboard. Indeed, the name Christopher Barnes was on the manifest, but she noted it was his seat that was listed as VIP 1. That seat was usually reserved for the plane's owner or high-level executives. Her inner confusion grew, but she tried to remain poised. I see. Right this way. Her voice was clipped, not quite welcoming. Christopher offered a polite grin, hoping to melt the tension. Thank you, Ms. Sharon Whitfield, she replied crisply, gesturing for him to move into the cabin. That same weary impatience flickered in her eyes. Meanwhile, Christopher's calm demeanor remained intact, though he couldn't help feeling a subtle wave of hostility. He had no desire to create friction, so he simply moved forward. But the moment weighed heavy in the air. If only Sharon had known then who she was dealing with, she might have chosen her words more carefully. The private jet's interior was luxurious, boasting wide leather seats, polished walnut tables, and state-of-the-art entertainment systems. Sharon guided Christopher to the exclusive VIP 1 seat, a mini suite in the front of the cabin with extra legroom and a privacy divider. The cabin could comfortably seat a dozen passengers, but for this trip, the manifest showed only 4 others. Each occupant was traveling for exclusive reasons: high-profile business, discreet tourism, or personal errands. None of them were likely to guess the magnitude of Christopher's wealth. As Sharon took Christopher's drink order, he asked for simple water, declining the champagne she half-heartedly offered. Her irritation simmered just below the surface. It was difficult to pinpoint exactly what was rubbing her the wrong way. Perhaps it was Christopher's self-assured calm or her own preconceived notions. All Sharon knew was that a persistent voice in her head asked, "Why is this guy in VIP 1?" She returned to the galley, shaking her head. Of all the days, she was already stressed, dealing with a manager's critique that she wasn't warm enough with first-class passengers. In her mind, she provided an excellent professional service. She just didn't see the need for over-the-top niceties. She remembered the recent argument with her fiancé, too. Money problems had them at each other's throats. Now she felt like she was stuck in a pressure cooker, and this flight was turning up the heat. Little did she realize that her snap judgments about Christopher would soon boil over. The seeds of conflict had been planted. All it needed was a small spark to erupt into a full-blown confrontation. One by one, the remaining passengers arrived. Each exuded a different aura. First came Mr. Patel, a middle-aged Indian businessman who ran an import-export conglomerate. He was soft-spoken and polite, wearing a tailored suit that showcased a refined sense of style. Sharon welcomed him warmly, her smile turning more genuine at the sight of someone who fit her expectation of an elite traveler. Next was Hannah Morgan, a famous fashion blogger who had become an online influencer seemingly overnight. Carrying a designer handbag worth more than a modest car, she waltzed into the cabin, filming a live snippet for her social media feed. Sharon lit up at Hannah's entrance, recognizing her from various ads. She indulged Hannah in a quick wave to the camera. The final 2 passengers arrived together, an older European couple, the Montclairs, semi-retired hoteliers from France. They displayed impeccable manners and greeted everyone with a respectful bonjour. The Montclairs took their seats in the rear of the cabin, preferring a quieter section for the journey. Sharon, adept at catering to wealthy travelers, shifted gears into her well-practiced routine, offering refreshments, distributing plush blankets, and providing magazines. She laughed politely at Mr. Patel's mild jokes and admired Hannah's fashion tips. For a while, it seemed like the flight might remain smooth and unremarkable, at least from an outside perspective. But beneath the courteous surface, tension still simmered between Sharon and the unsuspecting VIP 1 passenger. Only a thin layer of forced smiles separated calm from chaos. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom. announcing the final pre-flight checks and requesting passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Sharon walked through the aisle, verifying seatbelt usage with a perfunctory nod or forced grin. When she approached Christopher's seat, she hesitated. He was scrolling through documents on his tablet, deeply focused. Sharon cleared her throat, and Christopher immediately turned his attention to her. "Please ensure your seatbelt is secure, sir," she said curtly, though everyone else had already done so by that point. Christopher calmly put aside his tablet, fastened his belt, and said, "All set, Miss Whitfield." He was polite, but he noticed a flicker in her eyes that revealed her underlying tension. The engines roared to life, rattling the aircraft slightly. Hannah squealed in excitement and recorded the plane's ascent for her social media followers. Mr. Patel leaned his head back, quietly reading a trade magazine. The Montclairs whispered to each other in French, remarking on the splendid view of the city shrinking below them. Meanwhile, Christopher gazed out the window at the New York skyline, thinking of the philanthropic meeting in Tokyo and the responsibilities that lay ahead. If all went according to plan, millions of dollars would soon be channeled into feeding vulnerable communities through Feeding America, a cause he held dear. But fate had other ideas for the immediate future. Up in that cabin, thousands of feet above the earth, the stage was set for an explosive confrontation that would lay bare prejudices, unravel secrets, and lead to a karmic payback no one saw coming. About half an hour into the flight, Sharon began her cabin service. She distributed hot towels and took meal orders, deftly navigating the narrow aisle while balancing trays. She served Hannah first, who requested an Instagram-worthy fruit platter. Mr. Patel opted for a gourmet vegetarian dish, and the Montclairs asked for the seafood special with a side of champagne. Everything seemed routine, until Sharon approached Christopher. He was reviewing documents on philanthropic projects for next year's expansions when Sharon leaned in, checking her notepad. "We have a few meal options today," she said. Her tone was formal, but something about it felt off, as though each syllable was weighted with barely concealed disdain. Christopher looked up with a friendly expression. "I'll have the grilled salmon, please." Sharon jotted it down without making eye contact. "Would you like wine with that?" she asked, still clipped. "No, thank you," Christopher replied. "Water is fine." She nodded and walked away without the courtesy smile she had offered others. Christopher could sense the difference in her demeanor. It wasn't overtly rude, but it was conspicuously colder compared to how she treated everyone else. A pang of disappointment bloomed in his chest. He had encountered subtle prejudice before, moments when service providers questioned his presence in upscale environments. Usually, Christopher let such incidents slide, focusing on more pressing matters. But something about Sharon's attitude hinted that this conflict wouldn't just fade away quietly. Something bigger was brewing, and neither of them was prepared. With a barely audible "here," then turned swiftly on her heel to retreat to the galley. Christopher sighed. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was having a bad day. He picked up his phone, scrolled through emails, and tried to shift his focus. The philanthropic plans in Tokyo were paramount, finalizing a donation structure for Feeding America that would help expand food distribution to impoverished neighborhoods. He was also in talks with a few Japanese tech firms about an innovative app that could link grocery stores with homeless shelters, reducing food waste and ensuring a stable supply of essentials. This was the kind of work that got him excited, real, tangible change. Yet he couldn't fully concentrate. Sharon's behavior unsettled him. It wasn't that he expected special treatment, but the gulf between how she treated him versus the other passengers was glaring. He caught glimpses of her in the aisle, offering warm smiles to Hannah and the Montclairs, engaged in easy, pleasant conversation. The only time her expression hardened was when her gaze drifted over to Christopher. That repeated, cold glance struck him as painfully familiar, a subtle but unmistakable reminder of how prejudice could surface anywhere, even 30,000 feet above the earth. Midway through the flight, Christopher decided to step into the aisle to stretch his legs. He quietly passed the Montclairs, who nodded politely, and made his way to the rear of the cabin. Hannah was filming a behind-the-scenes vlog in her seat, showing off the jet's lavish interior. Mr. Patel was in conversation with a flight engineer about some potential business partnership. Everyone seemed engaged in their own world. In the small lounge area near the back, Christopher relaxed his tense muscles. The background hum of the plane was oddly soothing. He took a moment to appreciate his life, the opportunities he'd had, the success he'd achieved, and the responsibilities he felt to give back. Just then, Sharon came up behind him. Her voice startled him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, an edge cutting through her words. "This area is reserved for staff right now." He turned, confused. "I'm sorry, I was just stretching. There's no sign or anything. If it's off limits, I'll go back to my seat." Her expression was nearly hostile. "It's part of the policy that passengers remain in the main cabin unless told otherwise." Christopher was taken aback. He glanced around. No sign indicated restricted access. He'd flown this jet many times, technically his jet. On previous occasions, flight attendants had never objected to him or anyone else using that space. Despite the glaring incongruity, Christopher maintained his composure. "All right, Miss Whitfield," he said softly, stepping away to return to his seat. From a distance, Hannah, still filming her content, noticed the brief exchange. The camera captured the tension on Sharon's face as she confronted Christopher, though Hannah didn't yet realize the deeper conflict unfolding. That moment, however small, would become one of the many puzzle pieces forming a disturbing picture of bias at play. Back in his seat, Christopher struggled to maintain composure. His mind wandered to past incidents, restaurants where the staff assumed he couldn't afford the wine list, luxury car dealerships where salesmen barely acknowledged him until they saw his credit score, or high-end retailers that followed him around the store as though he might pocket the merchandise. He had learned to handle such microaggressions with grace, channeling the frustration into his philanthropic endeavors. If he could change minds with a demonstration of kindness and quiet strength, perhaps he could help dismantle at least some prejudice. But on his own plane, this felt especially galling. Meanwhile, Sharon's day was spiraling. She was behind on tasks because she kept rechecking the passengers' requests. Her personal phone buzzed with multiple missed calls. Her fiancé was probably fuming about something. Anxiety gnawed at her. She tried to stay collected, but her nerves showed in every short reply, every curt instruction. And in her increasingly agitated state, she found Christopher's presence more and more bothersome, irrationally so. It was as if she was projecting all her personal angst onto him. Somehow, she found his calm demeanor a provocation, as if he was challenging her authority. Rather than stepping back to breathe, Sharon barreled forward, letting her frustration congeal into prejudice. Whether conscious or not, she was singling Christopher out, burdening him with her private turmoil. She could have recognized these warning signs, taken a moment to regroup, and acted professionally. But stress, pride, and old biases wove together into a snare that was about to catch them both. A while later, Christopher realized he'd left an important file in his backpack, which he had stowed in the overhead bin near his seat. It contained some key data about the logistics for the Feeding America expansion. Rising from his seat, he stood on tiptoe to retrieve the backpack. As he did, a stack of envelopes and loose papers slipped from an outer pocket, spilling onto the aisle. "Shoot," Christopher mumbled under his breath as he knelt to collect them. Each envelope contained philanthropic pledges and funding proposals. Before he could gather them all, Sharon appeared, arms crossed. "Please don't make a mess in the aisle," she said sharply. Her tone was scolding, like she was addressing a misbehaving child. "We have other passengers trying to move around." Christopher exhaled calmly. "I'm just picking up my papers. I'll be done in a second." Sharon stood there, tapping her foot with irritation. "Next time, be more careful," she added, as though it were a personal affront that he'd dared to drop something. He scooped up the last envelope and carefully placed everything back into his backpack. Standing up, he tried to meet her gaze. "I understand you're busy, Miss Whitfield, but I can handle my own belongings." She flared her nostrils, gave a terse nod, and stomped back toward the galley. The hostility was unmistakable now. Several rows away, Mr. Patel and the Montclairs noticed the tense encounter. Hannah, recording snippets for her vlog, caught a glimpse of it as well. The cabin had become a pressure cooker, and everyone could sense the rising heat, everyone except the two people at its center, who were too immersed in their own emotional responses to see the storm clouds gathering. In the aftermath of that incident, the cabin atmosphere shifted. Whispers circulated among the passengers. Mr. Patel exchanged curious glances with the Montclairs, who, in soft French, remarked upon Sharon's odd behavior. Hannah, always on the lookout for something sensational, started suspecting that she might be witnessing a story worth capturing. Although she had no desire to film an invasive confrontation, she did, however, keep her phone in her hand, just in case something noteworthy happened. Christopher tried to immerse himself in his work. He read through the philanthropic documents, reviewing budgets and timelines. But concentration proved difficult with Sharon bustling around, her stony glare sweeping across him every time she passed by. Despite the tension, Christopher had no intention of causing a scene. He'd deal with the matter quietly once they landed, maybe report her conduct to the charter company's management. After all, as the plane's owner, albeit discreetly, he wanted staff who treated every passenger with courtesy, not singled them out for scorn. Yet the flight was far from over. Another 6 hours stretched ahead, with a quick refueling stop planned in Seattle. Then it was onward to Tokyo. In that time, the seeds of conflict could either wither or burst into full bloom. Meanwhile, Sharon circled the cabin like a hawk, asking if anyone needed anything except Christopher. He was left out of her typical care routine. She blatantly offered coffee or tea to the Montclairs and Mr. Patel, asked Hannah if she needed extra pillows, but ignored Christopher entirely. The cracks in her professional facade were widening, visible to anyone who cared to look. As if orchestrated by fate, the seatbelt sign pinged on a couple hours into the flight, signaling moderate turbulence. The plane began to sway gently, and the captain's voice instructed everyone to remain seated. Sharon promptly made her rounds to check that all passengers were buckled, in compliance with procedure. However, when she reached Christopher, she paused. He was already belted in, quietly reading a report on food distribution. She studied him with an unreadable expression before speaking in a low, reproachful tone. "Make sure your tray table is up," she said, even though it was already locked in place. Then she pivoted on her heel and moved on. Moments later, a sharper jolt rippled through the aircraft. Hannah let out a small shriek, and Mr. Patel clutched his armrest. Christopher looked up, scanning the cabin. Sharon was bracing herself against a seat, hair threatening to spill out of its bun. The Montclairs exchanged nervous remarks in French. After a couple of minutes, the turbulence eased, but the residual tension remained. When the turbulence subsided, Christopher took a moment to close his eyes and gather himself. He silently recited a motivational saying he often used when dealing with stress: "Rise above, remain steady." But little did he know that a mere seatbelt check and a tray table inspection would soon pale in comparison to the confrontation that awaited. Like building thunderclouds on a summer afternoon, the atmosphere between him and Sharon was charged, waiting for a lightning strike to unleash a storm. During a lull in the flight, Sharon slipped into the galley to make a call to her fiancé, desperately hoping to quell the tension in her personal life. The conversation was brief, hushed, and tense. From a nearby seat, Hannah inadvertently overheard snippets. "We can't afford that right now. No, I don't have it, and stop pressuring me." Once the call ended, Sharon emerged looking pale, her eyes brimming with frustration. Mr. Patel, who had come to the galley for a glass of water, politely asked, "Is everything all right, Miss Whitfield?" Sharon forced a professional smile. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied curtly, and handed him the water. As Mr. Patel turned to leave, Sharon's gaze darted into the cabin, locking onto Christopher as he quietly typed on his tablet. Something about him, his calmness, his understated confidence, his perceived out-of-place presence, fueled an irrational suspicion. Who is this guy really? She wondered. He's probably an imposter in VIP 1, Or maybe just some wealthy fool who lucked into a big contract. Her resentment boiled, shaped by her own financial stresses and personal problems. In her eyes, Christopher became the symbol of everything she lacked. And so, step by step, Sharon let her bitterness grow. Instead of carrying out the flight with the usual polished grace demanded by her job, she allowed personal bias and preconceived notions to erode her professionalism. It was a dangerously slippery slope, one that threatened to culminate in a disastrous misstep she could never take back. Noticing Sharon's drawn features and clenched jaw, Christopher decided to attempt a small gesture of kindness. He reasoned that maybe a simple, friendly conversation could diffuse whatever animosity she harbored. As she passed by, he gently raised a hand to catch her attention. "Miss Whitfield," he said softly, "may I have a moment?" Sharon's eyes narrowed, but she walked over, arms folded. "Yes, sir?" Her voice dripped with a forced politeness. Christopher met her gaze, speaking in a calm tone. "I just wanted to see if everything's all right. You seem stressed. If there's anything I can do." She cut him off abruptly, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "Oh, so now you want to play concerned passenger? Don't worry about me. Just focus on not spilling papers all over the aisle again." A flicker of hurt passed across Christopher's face. He had hoped for a conversation that might ease the tension. Instead, Sharon's words only fanned the flames. Still, Christopher kept his composure, replying gently, "I mean no disrespect. I appreciate your service." Sharon scoffed. "If you appreciate my service, then do me a favor. Stop distracting me." With that, she spun around and stomped off. A few rows away, Hannah blinked in disbelief. She had paused her vlog when she noticed Sharon's sharp retort. The Montclairs gave each other worried looks, and Mr. Patel frowned. Each passenger could sense the friction intensifying, like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Christopher sighed, sinking back into his seat. His well-intentioned approach had only aggravated the situation, and the flight was still far from over. Lunch service commenced. Sharon, still fuming, delivered each meal with mechanical efficiency. The Montclairs complimented her attentiveness, trying to lighten the mood. She forced a smile for them, but it evaporated the instant she turned away. Hannah filmed her lunch, praising the divine plating, while Mr. Patel quietly savored his vegetarian dish. Then came Christopher's turn. She placed the salmon entree on his tray without so much as a word. He offered a courteous smile. "Thank you." Sharon ignored him, pivoting on her heel to leave. However, in the motion, she jostled Christopher's drink, a glass of water perched precariously at the tray's edge. The cup tipped, splashing water across his lap. Christopher instinctively jumped up and a quiet gasp rippled through the cabin. The Montclairs looked on with concern, and Hannah's eyes widened behind her phone's camera, which was still casually rolling. "Oh no," Christopher muttered, grabbing a napkin to dab at his soaked jeans. "Accidents happen," he thought. He prepared to brush it off, but Sharon's reaction surprised him. She snapped, "You're too close to the tray. Maybe if you knew how to sit properly, this wouldn't happen." A flash of disbelief and indignation swept across Christopher's face. This was no longer a simple oversight. It was targeted hostility. Yet even now, he tried to remain composed. "It's okay. I'll clean up," he said. Sharon, however, offered no apology. She marched back to the galley, leaving Christopher with a wet seat and a burning sense that something major was about to break. In the aftermath of the spilled water, a hush fell over the cabin. No one openly confronted Sharon, but sideways glances spoke volumes. Hannah, phone still in hand, quickly muted her recording. She couldn't decide whether to keep filming. Part of her wanted to capture the drama. Her social media followers thrived on sensational content. But another part felt uneasy, as though she was intruding on a serious issue. The Montclair exchanged anxious looks. Madame Montclair whispered to her husband in French, "I've never seen such unprofessional conduct on a private flight." Mr. Patel discreetly approached Christopher. In a low voice, he asked, "Are you all right? It seems she's targeting you." Christopher nodded, forcing a courteous smile. "I'm fine," he replied, determined not to make a scene. Yet inside he felt a knot tightening in his chest. This wasn't the first time he'd dealt with someone's prejudice, but it never got easier. He wondered if he should reveal his identity as the jet's owner, but that approach felt self-indulgent. He'd always believed that true respect shouldn't hinge on his status or wealth. Across the aisle, Hannah shook her head, lips pressed together. She had caught enough on camera to suspect a story, one that extended beyond petty rudeness. This was a microcosm of discrimination playing out in real time, a snapshot of how biases can erupt when least expected. And so she decided to keep her phone at the ready, just in case. Something told her this wasn't the end of the trouble, only the beginning. As the flight neared its midpoint, Sharon's frayed nerves twisted into a tight coil of anger, frustration, and simmering resentment. She found herself replaying every stressful element of her life: her mounting bills, her fiancé's demands, her manager's criticisms. Each negative thought merged into a single narrative in her head. Life is unfair, and people like that guy in VIP 1 have it easy. It was irrational, but in her mind, Christopher became the symbol of unearned privilege. She watched him from afar, noticing his calm posture, how he typed smoothly on his tablet. What does he even do? She asked herself. Probably a trust fund kid, a clueless man-child who's never known real hardship. With each assumption, she fueled her own anger, feeding a beast that had no real basis in truth. Meanwhile, Christopher tried to refocus on his philanthropic work. He reminded himself that prejudice, when confronted with empathy and understanding, could sometimes dissolve. But Sharon's hostility didn't seem to stem from ignorance alone. It was tangled up in personal bitterness. He realized that any further attempts to mend fences might only provoke her. And so the flight continued in uneasy silence, broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional beep of the seatbelt sign. The tension swelled like a balloon ready to burst, and in that taut environment, it would only take one spark, a misunderstanding, a heated word, or a small accident, to ignite a full-blown catastrophe. Sharon, in a desperate bid to maintain control, decided to conduct a mid-flight cabin check. She walked from seat to seat, ensuring seat belts were unfastened or fastened as needed, though the turbulence had long ceased, and that tray tables were properly stowed. When she reached Christopher's row, her gaze landed on a small ring-bound folder on his tray table. "What's this?" she asked, voice sharp. "You need to keep the area clear. We're not collecting trash yet, but if you're done with this..." Christopher blinked. "I'm still using it. It's not trash. It's an important file for a philanthropic..." "Philanthropic," she echoed with a note of mockery. "Right." Sharon snatched at the folder, accidentally ripping a corner of the cover. Loose pages fluttered onto Christopher's lap. The Montclair and Mr. Patel looked on in alarm. "Hey," Christopher exclaimed, reaching for the pages. "Please be careful. Those are critical documents." A twinge of anger seeped into his tone, though he tried to remain steady. "Well, if they're so critical," Sharon spat, "maybe you should store them properly." She hovered over him, face contorted. "You're disrupting the cabin with your mess." Christopher stood, placing a protective hand on the scattered documents. "I'm not causing any disruption, Miss Whitfield. You're the one who took them." "I don't have time for this," she shot back. In a flash of rage, she swung her free hand in a wild arc, meaning perhaps to slap the documents away. But she missed. Her palm connected with Christopher's cheek in a resounding crack. The entire cabin fell silent. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Sharon's eyes widened in horror at what she'd just done. Christopher stood still, stunned. His cheek stung, but the pain was overshadowed by shock and disbelief. Hannah gasped audibly, her phone capturing every moment. Mr. Patel jumped to his feet, and Madame Montclair covered her mouth in alarm. Sharon's face went pale. She glanced at her own hand as if it belonged to someone else. Inside her mind, an alarm blared. What have I done? But it was too late. The action, the slap, was now an irreversible reality. It hung in the air, a monumental breach of decency and professional conduct, and the fallout was about to be catastrophic. Sharon staggered back a step, breathing heavily. A hush blanketed the cabin as if the plane itself held its breath. Christopher slowly lifted a hand to his stinging cheek, disbelief etched across his features. He had experienced discrimination before, verbal slights, suspicious glances, but never physical violence. The emotional impact hit him as swiftly as the slap. Hannah was the first to break the silence. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she asked Christopher, her phone still rolling. Mr. Patel moved closer, his face grim. "This is unacceptable," he declared. The Montclairs nodded in horror, Madame Montclair murmuring, "Mon Dieu." Sharon's composure crumbled. She stammered, I didn't mean, it was an accident." Tears welled in her eyes, a mix of regret and panic. She knew she'd crossed a line. No amount of apology could erase the fact that she'd struck a passenger, an act that could end her career, if not land her in legal jeopardy. Christopher inhaled deeply. His voice trembled, yet he spoke calmly. "Accident or not, you hit me. This is assault." Everyone heard the tremor in his words. He was holding himself together with sheer willpower. A wave of disbelief washed over the other passengers. The slap reverberated not just as a physical act, but as a stark representation of prejudice unleashed. The sense of betrayal and shock was palpable, and though Sharon tried to backtrack, stuttering apologies, the damage was done. They were still hours from landing in Seattle. The question now was how they would survive the rest of this flight. Hannah, her camera still capturing the chaos, regained her composure enough to speak. "Christopher," she said softly, turning her lens from Sharon's stricken face to Christopher's shocked expression. "This is beyond words. Is there anything you want to say?" He hesitated. He had spent years carefully guarding his identity. But in that moment, his cheek still hot from Sharon's slap, he decided he had nothing left to hide. Straightening his posture, he addressed the entire cabin, voice low but resolute. "I don't usually share personal information, but I think it's time everyone here knows the truth." Sharon, tears smudging her mascara, stared wide-eyed, as though bracing for a bombshell. The Montclairs and Mr. Patel leaned forward. Hannah continued filming, her social media instincts firing on all cylinders. "I am Christopher Barnes," he began. "I'm the largest shareholder in the company that owns this private jet." A collective gasp rippled across the passengers. Hannah's camera zoomed in on Christopher's face. He pressed on. "I purchased it through a series of holdings, so it's not common knowledge. I also fund philanthropic projects, including a major initiative with Feeding America. I was on my way to Tokyo to finalize a multi-million-dollar deal that will help feed struggling families across the U.S. He turned to Sharon, who looked like she might collapse. "Miss Whitfield, you assaulted not only a passenger, but the plane's owner." Christopher's voice was steady, though trembling with residual shock. "I've done my best to remain calm, but what you did was inexcusable." For a moment, no one spoke. The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sharon's knees buckled. She clutched a seat for support, her previously scornful eyes now filled with dread. The karmic blow had landed, and it was only just the beginning. Sharon's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for a lifeline in the faces of the passengers she had been serving. But their expressions ranged from outrage to pity. Even Hannah, whom Sharon had once treated like a VIP, looked upon her with disapproval. I didn't know," Sharon stammered, desperation leaking into her voice. "You didn't look like... She choked on her words, realizing that any excuse would only worsen her predicament. "You didn't look like someone who owned a plane." That was the unsaid prejudice shining through, a humiliating confession of bias. Christopher stood steady, his face resolute. The sting on his cheek was overshadowed by a deep moral indignation. "Miss Whitfield," he began, carefully measuring his words, "it shouldn't matter whether I own this plane or not. You have treated me with hostility from the moment I boarded, And now you physically assaulted me. Owning this jet just underscores how misplaced your assumptions were." Sharon's lips trembled. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She glanced at Hannah's phone, which was still recording the entire spectacle. "Please, don't ruin my life. I'm begging you." A soft, collective gasp arose from the other passengers. Sharon's meltdown was raw, almost painful to watch. But no one could deny the severity of her actions. A single moment of unbridled anger had set in motion a chain of events that might well end her career. And the flight still had miles to go. Just then, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. He had heard the raised voices through the cockpit door and received concerns from the co-pilot, who had glimpsed the commotion on a security screen. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Dawson. We're aware there's an issue in the cabin. I ask everyone to remain calm and seated. We will be landing in Seattle for refueling in about 2 hours. If necessary, we can address any urgent matters on the ground." The captain's calm, authoritative tone did little to quell the thick tension. Sharon sank into a nearby seat, face flushed and eyes rimmed with tears. Christopher exhaled, feeling relief that the pilot had intervened before the situation escalated any further. But he also knew that 2 more hours in this pressurized environment could feel like an eternity. Hannah discreetly stopped her recording, although she had enough footage to fill a week's worth of viral social media posts. She turned to Christopher and quietly said, "I'm really sorry this happened to you." He gave a small nod of appreciation. Mr. Patel also approached, gently placing a hand on Christopher's shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Do you need medical assistance?" Christopher shook his head. "Physically, I'm fine. Emotionally—" He paused, his eyes drifting to Sharon, who sat hunched over in a swirl of regret. "I guess we'll sort that out once we land." No one could deny that the flight had taken a dark turn, yet the real reckoning, legal, professional, and moral, still lay on the runway ahead. For the next hour, the cabin was eerily quiet. Sharon remained in her seat, too stunned and ashamed to resume her duties. Her mind spun with dire possibilities. She could be fired, sued, even arrested. Her entire future hung in the balance. She couldn't recall a time she'd felt so powerless. Christopher, for his part, also wrestled with tumultuous feelings. He replayed the slap in his mind, each time met with a wave of disbelief. He texted his attorney, explaining the situation. The lawyer replied instantly with a call for calm, assuring Christopher that everything could be handled upon landing. Christopher knew that as the jet's owner, he had the authority to have Sharon immediately dismissed from duty, and possibly face legal consequences. Hannah sat quietly, phone nestled in her lap. She wasn't sure how she would handle the footage she'd captured. Ethical considerations warred with her influencer instincts. "This is real-life trauma," she reminded herself, "not just content." Mr. Patel and the Montclairs glanced worriedly at Sharon and Christopher, offering supportive smiles to the latter whenever he met their eyes. Outside, the plane soared through clear skies, a stark contrast to the turmoil within. If an outsider had looked in, they might see a picture of opulence, a sleek private jet filled with plush seats and high-end amenities. But the true story was one of fractured pride, prejudice laid bare, and the reverberating consequences of a single, shocking act of violence. After what felt like an eternity, the pilot announced their final descent into Seattle. The passengers strapped in, silent with anticipation. Sharon gingerly rose to prepare the cabin for landing, her movements robotic. She avoided eye contact, especially with Christopher. Every step felt like walking to her own execution. The jet touched down smoothly on the runway, tires squeaking as they met the asphalt. Captain Dawson taxied to a private hangar for refueling. Normally, flight attendants would oversee the refreshment of the cabin and assist passengers if they wanted to disembark for a short break. But this was far from a normal situation. As soon as the plane was parked, 2 uniformed ground staff entered. One was the station manager for this private terminal. He had already been briefed by the pilot about an incident involving assault. The other was a security officer, Sharon's face drained of color when she saw them approach. Christopher collected his belongings and calmly stood, bracing himself for a necessary but uncomfortable confrontation. Hannah, Mr. Patel, and the Montclairs remained seated, watching the scene unfold with cautious concern. Outside, the refueling truck rumbled into position, oblivious to the human drama unfolding just meters away. The atmosphere crackled with tension as the station manager and security officer conferred quietly with Captain Dawson. Sharon's heart pounded in her chest. Christopher inhaled deeply, preparing for what came next. The moment of reckoning had finally arrived, and there was no turning back. The station manager, a middle-aged man named Robert, approached Christopher first. "Mr. Barnes," he said, extending a hand, "I'm deeply sorry for this incident. We've been informed about what happened. If you wish to press charges or take any immediate action, we're ready to assist." Christopher, still composed despite his swirling emotions, nodded. "I appreciate your support, Robert. I need to speak with Miss Whitfield before we move forward with any formal proceedings." Sharon stood a few steps away, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold together the fragments of her reality. Tears streaked her cheeks. Robert motioned for her to come forward, and she approached with trembling steps. In a voice strained by remorse, Sharon began, "I can't say anything to excuse what I did. I let my personal problems twist my judgment. When I slapped you, I don't know what came over me. It's not who I am. I'm so sorry." Christopher regarded her quietly. "The fact remains, you assaulted me. Not only me, but a passenger on a flight you were responsible for. You crossed a line that never should have been crossed." Sharon shut her eyes, tears spilling freely. "I know," she whispered. "I understand if you want to fire me. Sue me. Anything." A pause lingered as Christopher weighed his options. The security officer stepped closer, prepared to enact an arrest if needed. The rest of the passengers watched, breath held. This was the climax. How would Christopher, the plane's owner and the wronged party, respond? He took a moment to gather his thoughts. The image of Sharon's slap was fresh in his mind, but so was his commitment to compassion. Finally, he exhaled. "Sharon, you have to face the consequences. But I also believe in second chances under the right circumstances." Christopher cleared his throat, addressing Robert, the station manager. "I want Miss Whitfield removed from this flight. She's clearly not in the right emotional state to continue working. As for pressing charges, I'd like to hold off for now." He paused, glancing at Sharon, who stood there, frail and trembling. "Sharon," he continued, voice steady, "you need help. I sense that this act, while inexcusable, stems from deeper issues. I won't pretend your apology erases the slap, but I'm willing to give you a chance to learn and grow, provided you undergo therapy and you find a way to address your biases. You do need to understand, though, that the airline and the authorities might still take action." Tears welled in Sharon's eyes again, but this time they carried a glimmer of relief. "Thank you," she said shakily. "I don't deserve your compassion, but thank you." Robert and the security officer exchanged a solemn nod. Robert spoke up. "We'll ensure Miss Whitfield is escorted off the aircraft. We'll also report this incident to the charter company's HR department." Captain Dawson, having stepped into the cabin, added, "We'll need a replacement flight attendant before we can safely continue. That might cause a delay of a few hours. I apologize to all passengers." Christopher turned to the other passengers. "I'm sorry you had to witness this," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. Each responded with sympathetic murmurs, clearly relieved that the conflict was at least partially resolved. Then Christopher looked again at Sharon. "I hope you take this opportunity to reassess and to do better," he said quietly. Sharon could only nod, tears flowing freely. Her career lay in shambles, her actions a stark lesson in how prejudice and anger could ruin a life in mere seconds. Yet she had one small ray of mercy: Christopher's decision to withhold immediate criminal charges, offering her a slim pathway to redemption. After Sharon was escorted away, The passengers disembarked for a stretch in the private terminal lounge while the jet underwent refueling and the airline scrambled to find a standby flight attendant. The Montclairs wandered to a cafe, discussing the dramatic turn of events in hushed French. Mr. Patel sat quietly in a corner, making phone calls to reschedule his business meetings. Hannah slipped outside to record a quick update for her vlog. Not the sensational meltdown itself, but a thoughtful commentary on prejudice and kindness. Christopher used the downtime to speak with his legal counsel. They agreed on a balanced approach. A detailed report of the incident would be filed, but Christopher would refrain from immediate criminal charges. If Sharon faced accountability from her employer and showed genuine remorse, such as seeking counseling, he would consider letting the matter stay out of the courts. As he ended the call, Christopher leaned back in his seat, staring at the airport bustle through a large window. He felt drained, the adrenaline rush receding. The day had taken a surreal turn, from a routine flight to a moral confrontation that left him reeling. Yet he also felt a sense of resolve. He'd spent his life breaking barriers, both in business and philanthropy, and he believed strongly that hatred or prejudice, when met with steadfast compassion, could be diminished. The replacement flight attendant finally arrived, a young woman named Elena, who looked both professional and kind. With the plane now ready for the next leg of the journey, Christopher steeled himself for the continuation to Tokyo, hoping the remaining flight would bring peace instead of turmoil. With Sharon gone, the atmosphere aboard the jet felt different, subdued yet calmer, as though a heavy cloud had lifted. Elena, the replacement flight attendant, was briefed on the situation in vague terms, told only that an unfortunate event had occurred, resulting in her last-minute dispatch. She greeted everyone with a warm smile, an almost palpable gentleness compared to Sharon's rigid demeanor. Mr. Patel offered Christopher a seat next to him, hoping conversation might ease the tension. But Christopher politely declined, preferring a bit of solitude to process the day's events. He did, however, chat briefly with Hannah, who thanked him for handling the confrontation with dignity. "Your compassion was really inspiring," she said, her voice sincere. "You could have had her arrested on the spot." Christopher shrugged slightly. "Anger begets anger. I've seen too much of that cycle. Doesn't mean I'm not hurt or upset. But if a bit of understanding can open someone's eyes, it's worth trying." The Montclairs nodded in agreement from across the aisle, and Madame Montclair expressed quiet admiration. The flight took off from Seattle without fanfare, rising into an evening sky streaked with pastel colors. The hours ahead might be long, but at least they seemed free from conflict. Christopher retreated to his seat, opening his philanthropic proposals once more. He had a mission waiting in Tokyo, an important meeting that would bring aid to countless families. As the jet soared, he focused on that goal, letting it reaffirm his faith that good could come out of life's trials. Despite the sting still fading from his cheek, he felt an unmistakable sense of closure. Sometimes justice and mercy could coexist. By the time the jet was halfway across the Pacific, word of the incident had already begun to spread, at least in small circles. Hannah had posted a short video, carefully edited to exclude the most personal details, but to highlight the broader message. Prejudice has no place, and sometimes the wealthiest people are the humblest. Within hours, the video started garnering attention. Commenters praised Christopher's poise and condemnation of violence. Some demanded Sharon face legal repercussions, while others argued that Christopher's compassion was the real moral. Meanwhile, the airline's corporate office received an urgent report from the station manager. Internal investigations were set in motion, phone calls were made, and an email chain lit up with inquiries about possible next steps. On the plane, Christopher finally allowed himself a moment of rest. The seat was reclined, and soft cabin lights glowed as Elena served him a simple meal. The Montclairs closed their eyes in slumber, and Mr. Patel typed away on his laptop. Hannah was also dozing, phone in her lap. For the first time since takeoff from JFK, the cabin truly felt peaceful. Though still shaken, Christopher carried a subtle sense of victory. Not because he'd won against Sharon, but because he'd managed to uphold the values he cherished: kindness, fairness, the hope that people can change. If the incident made even one person reconsider their prejudices, then something good could arise from the ugliness, and that in his mind was a victory worth having. And there you have it, a single moment of unchecked anger that left one flight attendant's career in ruins, while shining a light on the prejudice that still lurks in unexpected corners. But from chaos came clarity. Christopher Barnes, a humble billionaire devoted to feeding those in need, exemplified the power of compassion and taught a lesson that fairness and understanding transcend wealth or status. Where Sharon's slap could have unleashed a storm of retribution, Christopher's empathy offered a sliver of redemption. It's a reminder that every action, good or bad, echoes far beyond the moment. If you found value in this story, its twists, turns, and ultimate message of empathy, please do hit the like button, share it with friends who might need this reminder, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking tales. Let's keep the conversation of compassion and justice soaring to new heights.